Hello, everybody. This is Vivian Asimos popping in at the beginning of this episode in order to let you know that if you missed our lovely announcement, Fan of That is launching its very own Patreon. You can hop on over to patreon.com/fanofThatPod for more information. You can also check out our announcement episode where we talked a little bit in more detail about it. But if you are interested in having bonus episodes, which will be released throughout our off season, then you can go sign up on Patreon, where you will also have access to a Discord where you can recommend episode topics, and you can also vote on upcoming episodes for season 3 and any of the seasons moving forward. Hopefully we'll see you there. And welcome to I'm a Fan of That, the show where we talk about the wonderfully complicated world of fandom through the objects we love. And I just realized I don't think we have an object for today.
I don't think we do either. How do we represent what we're going to talk about? It's sort of nebulous, isn't it?
Maybe the object is the missing audio file of the other episode we had recorded.
That has disappeared into the ether.
Oh no! So basically we had another episode and then I could not find any files for it at all. I don't know where they went. They just disappeared. So we'll re-record that one, but maybe next season when we have forgotten everything that we have said. And instead...
It was a good episode though. It was. I promise. Yeah, you guys are going to really enjoy it when we redo it.
But instead, today, we decided we were going to talk a lot about, I think, the really beautiful, wonderful, happy side of fandom, because that's what we love to fill our brains with.
Yeah, the good stuff, the good fun stuff.
But today, I think we're going to talk about the other side of the coin when it comes to fandom, which is that sometimes we are no longer fans of things. And this can be for purely, life. You move on, you change the things you like. It happens. Sometimes it is foisted upon you by novelists who act in allegedly questionable ways.
Yeah.
Sometimes due to another novelist's alleged actual transphobic
actual transphobic comments.
That's not alleged. I can cite that. But, these are examples of some of the things that happen when we are forced to confront what we do about it. And so I thought maybe we've been kind of hinting around She Who Must Not Be Named quite a bit this season.
Oh, I think we have to talk about it, don't we?
So, I think we talk about her in relation to everything else. Obviously, in more recent news, it's been a bit now, though, Neil Gaiman's allegations have been coming to light, and it's kind of a very different that's very different than the J.K. Rowling thing.
Yeah.
But there also is still a problem.
Yeah. There is a conversation to be had around what do you do when something you love becomes, I don't want to say toxic or whatever, but there are problems. Yeah, there are issues around the creator for whatever reason that are. It's not just internet drama. It's not, it's not the John Green situation. Let's say, if anybody doesn't know, John Green was accused of a lot of random stuff on Tumblr many, many years ago, basically by some slightly toxic fans of his, and bullied off Tumblr for nothing. So it's not that. And John Green has actually talked about that at length. I would say go and listen to him talk about it because it is very interesting. But it is not that situation with Neil Gaiman and with J.K. Rowling. These are people who have done things or continue to do things that are in some cases illegal.
Yeah.
In other cases just horrible. And they're not the only ones. We've talked about, Lovecraft, this kind of thing. But how, as fans, do we reconcile that? And I do think the answer is sometimes we can't. I think in particularly the case of J.K. Rowling, and I'm not really going to comment on Neil Gaiman because I think that's an ongoing situation. And while what has been he has been accused of, I absolutely believe what has been said. I don't. It's an ongoing situation. I don't want to comment on it while it's being investigated.
Things through publishing people that this doesn't seem out of it. So,
no, I mean, absolutely, this is horrific.
But it's still. I think this one's more tricky for saying allegedly.
Yeah,
I don't want to be certain, although I do also want to make it noted that I do believe the people who are speaking.
I think the problem I have is that while it is an ongoing investigation with police and people who are properly involved in that, I think, and for the sake of the victims, the people who have come forward, I don't want to comment on it right now.
Yes,
that's as far as I
feel I just wanted to make it certain that people knew that we are on their side.
Absolutely, no, absolutely not. This is very much a let's just not touch that,
but yes,
while people are in pain and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Whereas with J.K. Rowling, fuck her to high hell. She did this, also this is awful,
It's one of those weird things where there is a lot of similarity, but also very stark differences that I think is important to note. Yeah. That while what J.K. Rowling does is hurtful on many levels to many people, it is hurtful in a very different way.
Yeah. And there aren't, I would say, in J.K. Rowling's situation, I wouldn't say there are specific victims. She has targeted people, but not in the way that Neil Gaiman did. And
she's hurting a community rather than people.
Yes, I
feel that sounds like I don't think they're people. You know what I mean? Individuals.
This is such a difficult conversation. Maybe we should just re-record this entire intro and just be like, we're not going to talk about Neil Gaiman. It's an ongoing investigation.
But it is what kind of, I think, brought us to wanting to talk about this discussion. And I think I've had a personal kind of weird experience of this on a different level. I used to be a fan of Rooster Teeth, which Rooster Teeth is an online production company. Although I don't know if they exist anymore, but I don't know. They did at one point. Whether or not they continue to do, I'm not really positive.
They used to have conventions and stuff.
They like did. I went to one.
Oh, wow.
I went to, I think, the second one that they hosted in London. Either the first or the second. And so, yeah, I mean, I was a fan. I watched, I mean, pretty much everything that I consumed was one of either them or their subsidiaries. They had like little offshoots like Achievement Hunter, which was like more video game centered. And I think at around probably 2019, somewhere, I should have looked this up, but there was around a particular time the first kind of issues started popping up, and the first one was with an Achievement Hunter named Ryan Haywood, who it came out had been sexually assaulting and often raping fans of the show. So that is obviously a huge problem. They tried to respond to it by kind of erasing as much of him as they could, and, But I think that there's... It in retrospect, we can look back and see there were much bigger issues with that company, because it started coming out more and more and more issues with it, including very ingrained transphobia against one particular person who worked there, kind of talking about the homophobia and transphobia that they had to deal with, which several people had since come back, even non-publicly before they said it, saying, oh shit, looking back at what I did, that's not okay. And so they, the person kind of was like, they've learned already before this came out, but the company kind of hasn't. And it's just been kind of this spiraling downhill. But it was really interesting to be involved in the community when all of this was happening, because you could see the kind of responses. So at first, when Ryan Haywood's issues came out, like, I had a Ryan shirt. Each of the Achievement Hunters had an Achieve shirt, which was like an outline of their face, and they were doing something that was related to their character, and I had Ryan's because I really liked him as his character. And I just threw out the shirt because it's like, I don't want to wear that. There were people trying to figure out what to do with the Ryan Haywood shirts or any of the merchandise that included him in any way, and so you see not just what the company was doing, but how the fans were discussing amongst themselves well, what do we do? And we are a show that starts with the stuff. And so that was the really interesting thing, is you have all this stuff that has his name or his face or his likeness somewhere in it. And what do you do with that?
I think it's even harder with Rooster Teeth. What I was saying is was never really a Rooster Teeth person, but I think it's very interesting because in that situation, it's the person who you are a fan of, so as much as obviously they were creating work and you like the work and all that kind of stuff, because particularly on YouTube, people put their personalities, their faces front and center. That's how people get, brand recognition a lot of the time. You become a fan of the image of the person as much as the work they're doing, which I think is a little bit different to J.K. Rowling, who, as much as obviously her presence is very clear in her work, I think a lot of people are trying to work out how to differentiate Harry Potter in particular from J.K. Rowling, and that is a very interesting thing.
It's more possible to do.
That's more possible to do. I'm not sure it is now, for various reasons, but it's really interesting when it is the person you're a fan of, you realise, oh shit, like you said, you had his face on a t-shirt. You don't want to walk around with that face on a t-shirt. I saw a guy the other day wearing a Lovecraft t-shirt with like H.P. Lovecraft's face on it, and I just kind of went, I don't think I'd want to do that. No. No. I've obviously made various arguments for weird fiction and the Cthulhu, Eldritch lore and all that kind of stuff now being separate from Lovecraft, but to actually have a Lovecraft t-shirt, my goodness. But that's it. I think that's it must have been a very difficult thing to do when you realise that somebody who you've admired, I suppose, actually has been taking, and particularly in that situation as well, not to say it would any worse if he was sexually assaulting anybody, but the fact that he was choosing to prey on fans meant that he was using that admiration to get what he wanted, which is awful and sucks so much. And this is why I think it's so difficult when the thing you're a fan of goes wrong, in inverted commas. I think that's the only way I can describe it, is that it stops. You can no longer be a fan of it for whatever reason it might be, whether that is the behaviour of the person creating it, or the person who's in it, or the thing itself, the storyline going off the rails in some capacity. Because I think it's very difficult to work out how you feel about that. We do get very emotionally connected and part of these things. So I can see why people struggle. I can really see why people, even in that situation, were being like, but what do we do about this? Because I love this thing, but this thing is bad now. Or it's very difficult to put moral relativism on a thing, but he did a bad thing. He was being bad. He was doing things that were immoral, and the thing he's in, I like. So how do I clock that in my head? It's difficult.
And it did have it, because like for me, that was when I started basically distancing myself from Rooster Teeth, and because I was like, well, I don't really know what to watch, because some of this, like, because I used to watch older ones like as background. This was before I would watch reality TV as background. It's why I started watching reality TV as background noise when I worked, was because I no longer felt comfortable going and watching old Achievement Hunter videos because they had Ryan in them. And so then I stopped keeping up with it. So it did, like, I distanced myself, and it meant that I had a knock-on effect of the whole compass of that company just kind of starting to not be as much of a fan anymore, because and Rooster, as I said, Rooster Teeth had a lot of problems. But I think one of the things that's really interesting about internet fandoms is that you can almost kind of see how the individual, when you're a fan of like individual people like that, how they genuinely feel based off of how the fan base is. And Rooster Teeth's fan base was always crazy toxic and was always very questionable. And at first it was like, oh, well, that's because it's on the internet and you always get these people. And now that I've been in other fandom circles that are not that, it makes it a lot more obvious that it was like, oh, no, it's because those personalities were attracting a certain type of person. And that's just what it was.
I would say that's incredibly common with online spaces. What I find interesting on a completely different level was when Watcher recently, so Watcher is Ghost Files, Puppet History, Ryan and Shane. They used to be BuzzFeed Unsolved, and then they left BuzzFeed and formed Watcher. And I love Watcher. I absolutely love them. Puppet History is one of my favourite things that they've ever done. It's so good. It's just great fun. It's a puppet teaching you history. What's not to love? And it's got its own silly overarching storyline thing about one of the contestants on the show and the host, the professor, like being sort of at war with each other. It's very strange, right? It's a very silly show, right? And Ghost Files and Mystery Files are essentially a ghost hunting show and a true crime show. They're very silly. I love them. I love BuzzFeed Unsolved. I've watched them for years and years and years. And then they said, oh yeah, wait, but we're going to go and make our own streaming service and we're going to make you pay for it and it's going to be all off YouTube. And you're going to have to pay like I think it was $5 a month or something to start with, at least. And then we were like, say what now? You did what? I mean, it's a completely different level. It is not at all the same thing. But it destroyed the fan base that they were going to take away what was essentially free content on YouTube that you could subscribe to their Patreon and do YouTube membership and all that kind of stuff with. So there were payment methods of which to do it. A lot of people were part of that. And just go, no, we're going to take this away from you. You have to pay for it. We're going to put the whole thing behind a paywall. And a lot of their fans are young people. A lot of their fans are people at university. They are students. They are, people like me who work in the arts who don't necessarily have even $5 a month to give to a streaming service extra on top of everything else, particularly when you're paying bills and all that kind of stuff and you don't have very much money. It was a real kick in the teeth. And I actually, the moment they announced it, it was almost like a switch flipped on my head to be like, oh, I don't like your shows anymore. Which is not true, yeah. I do. I actually would go back and watch them. But it's not, like, I don't feel the desire to go back and watch them. Like, they used to be the same thing. That you'd be my background TV. I'd go back and watch old BuzzFeed Unsolved episodes. But I don't do that anymore because it was enough to break that, like, bond of trust between me and what they were doing. It's like, damn, that hurts. That really hurts that you've treated your fan base like that. And they were essentially trying to copy the Dropout model, except Dropout used to be College Humor, and they have a huge amount more traction behind them and a huge amount more stuff. They've just got more shows, more to do. Like, they can create an entire streaming service, and they did it very slowly. And Watcher tried to do it too fast. They kind of went, no, we're going to do it all at once. Whereas Dropout went, no, we're going to very slowly build this up. And, it was just a different model. Yeah, I'm not sure but it is interesting when you kind of feel that thing of like, this has hurt me. And I think it can, and this is, I use this example because I think it can happen on various different levels. I don't think it has to be a horrible thing like sexual assault or worse. There are lots of horrible crimes that somebody could commit. I don't think it has to be that. It can just be a break in trust with the fan base of saying, actually, we want your money.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's that breaks in trust can happen on many different levels, but it still is going to hurt the same. Like, I was never one of the victims, but it still broke my trust in this, in a way that something else similar would. Like, I used to listen to, similar to your experience, I used to listen to Last Podcast on the Left, and then I don't know if they've gone back on this now because I haven't listened to them since this happened, but there was a small point in time where they shifted to Spotify only. And I think it's free on Spotify, but I don't listen to podcasts on Spotify. I have a podcast app that aggregates everything, and so if I have to go to a separate app, I'm just not going to listen to you because it's too much effort to go through in order to do that, and I don't have that drive to go and do that for you. When it's like, well, why would you do that? Why would you do that to people that are already enjoying your stuff?
Yeah. I think it is very interesting that when you are making content, particularly if you're doing online content, you are incredibly reliant on your fans, right? I think that's sort of less so now, weirdly, for more commercial media, so things that are on TV or on streaming services, because actually they don't care if it gets fans unless it gets a certain amount of watches in 2 weeks. You're probably going to get cancelled at the moment. It's a mess, which is a really odd, that's an entire odd different situation. But for like online content where you webcomics, podcasts, YouTube shows, all this sort of stuff, TikTok creators either, you are incredibly reliant on the people who engage with you. You don't have anything else to, hold you up, which is why I totally understand when they are, the need to find more sustainable routes into these things, when things like YouTube are strangling reach and all that kind of stuff, and there are issues with the platforms that are being hosted on. I completely understand the need to find another way to sustain yourself and to keep yourself afloat. But that feels like there's more, to do it off the back of the people who are supporting you already, to kind of put more pressure on them to be how you keep yourselves afloat. It feels bad to the fans. I'm not saying it's necessarily the wrong choice, because I think, like with Dropout, there are ways of doing it where it feels like everybody's getting a good deal, but it has to be done well, And I don't think...
Speaking of which, patreon.com/Fandom.
Oh yeah, you should totally... Patreon, I'm a fan of that. I think it's fan of that pod.
Fan of that pod, I think, yeah.
Okay.
We're professionals that totally know our Patreon.
We'll just edit in a clip of us saying what it is. This is the point where we put our own ads in now. Yes. But no, I do think there is an awful lot of, at the moment, there's a lot of problems with trying to work out what to do, because there are issues with the platforms that are hosting people. Like, I wouldn't say that any podcasting platform is brilliant right now. But that also, you have to balance it. You have to work out what you can do for people in order to make everybody feel supported. It's very hard. And as creators, we know that.
Yeah.
We'll plug our Patreon.
Well, I mean, when we were starting the Patreon, that was a really lengthy discussion we had, is wanting to make sure that people who couldn't afford to even give us £1, which we totally get. I mean, I've been there.
Oh, yeah.
I still kind of am to an extent. So
we're in the arts. We're struggling,
man. I get it, but to make it feel like they're not being ousted, while also... I've always said that I never wanted to take away anything. I always wanted to just have extra behind the paywall and never remove anything that was at once point free, so no one has that expectation of, well, I used to have this thing. But that was like, I mean, that we had to have those conversations of like, well, how are we going to balance this, because this is important to do, because also it, as creators, you have a certain wish to take projects in a direction and all that kind of stuff, and as fans, you want to be involved. And it's very interesting being on both sides of that coin. Like, we are both fans of things where we have had our trust broken, but we are also creators where we are wanting to make sure that we don't do that for people who follow and support us. And it's a very hard... It's hard to navigate. And I don't think... Like, I hold no I can't say that word. I don't hate the guy... Thank you. I don't hate the guys at Watchers. I don't have an issue with the fact that they wanted to do more for their company. I have an issue of how they went about doing it and how they presented it, because it felt disingenuous and it felt condescending. They didn't do it well, whereas they could have thought about it a little bit harder, and just approached it slightly differently, and it probably would have worked. Because the thing I find quite interesting, and this is going a little bit off tack, is that quite a few creators, like Philosophy Tube, now do their work through things like Nebula, which is a streaming service where you do pay, but there is enough creators involved in Nebula altogether, in the same way that Dropout has a huge amount of creators all working together rather than just like one team. So it does make sense. It's like you are getting a full streaming service on Nebula, right? It's a documentary streaming service. The same is true of things like History Hit, right? So History Hit is a podcasting and documentary network set up by Dan Snow. Fucking Dan Snow. Right, it's fine. And I love their podcasts. They're great. And the moment that I can afford to subscribe to their streaming service, I will, because if the podcasts are as good as they are, and they are all free, and you get them free without ads on the streaming service, as well as new documentaries every single month, oh yeah, absolutely, I will subscribe to that, because there's a huge amount of creators involved, there's a huge amount of content, and I want that content. But that's presented to me as, you get this free stuff that you like and you can try out, and that's cool, and you get all of that for free, and here's the extra yummy bits on top that you could have if you pay money. Yeah.
And I think that's the way to do it, like you said. It shouldn't be ever taking away what was free. It should be adding more on top. And that's not what Watcher did. This didn't mean to go into a tirade about Watcher. I just feel like they destroyed so much trust in fan bases.
I think there's something that I've started to learn by being, like you said, on both sides of the coin, and then also kind of having a much more active eye, especially after the Rooster Teeth terrible fallout, is paying a lot more attention to how people monitor their fan base. Because like I said, I think there is a certain amount of horrible people on the internet is going to happen. What I think some creators do better than others is monitoring that and actually having to take action in order to make sure that their fan base remains a safe place. But they have to be active in that. They can't be passive about it. And watching that when people are passive, how it can turn in that. Tom and I watch some speedrunners, and I'm going to try to be vague because I don't want anyone to feel like I'm calling them out or anything. But they were watching a competition of various speedrunners, and one of them is notorious for having a very toxic fan base. Though all of the other speedrunners talk about how the guy's actually a really nice guy. Like, he's not a terrible person. He just has this really toxic fan base. Isn't that just the internet is kind of how they treat it? But he doesn't do anything to stop the toxicity in the fan base. And it gets to a really bad point where in this competition, his fan base was going out to these other streamers and like insulting them and kind of attacking them in their streams on behalf of their streamer. And it's like, well, if you don't approve of that, then why can't you easily figure out who those people are and ban them from your chat? And that's you taking action to demonstrate, I don't agree with this.
You can say, guys, I don't want you to do this. Please stop. You could just say it.
Well, you can say it, but you need to
also take action,
follow through
exactly
for it. And
but like, if you
I don't watch his stream, so I don't know what he was saying and what he wasn't. But from what I heard, he wasn't doing any of that follow through. He was at least not taking any affirmative action of banning those people. Or anything like that. It was just, this fan base is so toxic, and it's
you've let it be like that.
You bred that.
Yeah. Like, if you don't deal with it, if you don't stamp out that behaviour very early on, and that is giving warnings and saying, guys, I don't want you to do this, I will ban people, making sure they know that's what's going to happen, and then following through and doing it. It's like parenting, right? You can't punish your kid. You can't say, oh, well, you've behaved badly, and so I'm going to take your toys away, and then not take the toys away. That's not how it works.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't. I mean, I don't necessarily think that's a brilliant way of parenting, but you can't say you're going to do something and then not do it. And like you said, you don't know what he's saying or what he's not saying on that thing. But the fact is that he must not be curtailing this behaviour at all. Yeah. Because otherwise it wouldn't be there.
And I think there's also a certain level of a reflection on what that must mean for him outside of it. And I'm sure he's a nice guy, but if you're not taking those actions, where's your level of nice? Mm-hmm. Are you actually a safe place for certain people, or are you just the guy that says, oh yeah, it's fine?
Yeah, I would hate it if somebody did that. Like,
exactly.
I once had a situation years ago where there was a problem. There was a small issue with another cosplayer. It wasn't massive. It was around some photo shoot ideas, and it felt like essentially what happened was somebody sent me an image and said, oh, I didn't know Egg had done the same shoot as you for somebody else. And I was like, what? And this other cosplayer's images looked incredibly, almost identical to some that me and Egg had done a couple of weeks before. And essentially it felt in that moment like that person had gone and copied the idea. Mm. I personally think, having talked to them and all this kind of stuff and said, what the hell, and had a back and forth with them, that it was just a coincidence. Just happens. It was just one of those things. I don't think there was particularly a problem. At the time, I was quite upset because we'd spent quite a lot of work doing it, but it wasn't like I wanted to just talk to them and be like, hey, did you copy our idea? And then they said no, and I went, they went, I can prove this, and they were like, I bought these, I said it all weeks ago, I'm really sorry that it's clashed. And I was like, nope, fair enough, it was what it was. Water under the bridge. Coincidence. Except somebody who I was friends with at the time went and posted hate on their pictures. And I was like, what the hell are you doing? And they were like, oh, no, I'm defending you. I'm like, no, you're not. I'm dealing with it. Like, whatever has happened, I'm dealing with it. It doesn't matter. I'm talking to this person. It's private, and we are talking about it. You going and doing that just makes the whole situation worse.
Yeah.
And I was like, what the hell are you doing? And you don't do that in somebody else's name ever. And if you don't, even in that small situation, it's not a big deal and it was dealt with. But like, how you can't, if you don't stop people behaving in that way in your name, you want it in some capacity, as far as I'm concerned. Like, if people who are fans of this show went and started talking shit about other fandom shows, I'd be like, what the hell are you doing?
Yes.
What are you doing? Not that I think anyone here would. But, if that happened, we'd be mortified.
Exactly. And I think that's what I mean is, like, there's a certain level of seeing that kind of stuff. Like, if I had the knowledge now and the maturity of understanding this now as I did back when I was a fan of Rooster Teeth, I probably would have seen the writing on the walls of, oh, if this is how your fan base is and you're not doing anything to go, hey, let's delete the comments that say something transphobic, then it's like, well, then you're allowing a certain level of that to exist. I actually had a big issue with this on mine. There was somebody who posted, there was a TERF that posted a comment on one of my videos. And it was a pleasant comment. But they said something about, oh, I really love the representation of the LGB community. Right? And when I first saw it, I was like, well, this must be a TERF. And I was debating on deleting it or putting a comment that be like, no, actually, I'm supportive of trans people. But then I was sat there being like, oh, but can you imagine if this person just did a typo and was writing too fast and missed the T, and then somebody comes on being like, fuck you, you TERF. Like, like that would suck so bad. So I just didn't respond at all. And just figured I'll leave it, but I won't respond. And then that way, if it's turfy, I haven't responded. But also, I'm not attacking someone who's not doing that. And then it turned out through their interactions with someone else that, yes, they are a TERF. And I was debating on whether or not to delete the comment at that point. Because it was like, I don't want someone to go on my page and think that I'm supportive of that.
Yeah. Difficult,
but at the same time, I did end up making a comment when somebody said, oh, I found the TERF, and then they responded in some assholey turfy way, and then I just wrote, oh, geez, I was really hoping this was a typo.
Yeah.
As my way, it was my attempt to be like, I'm not supportive of that while still leaving the comment, but it was it's like a hard thing to try to figure out, like, how much of a step in do you do for these things?
Like, I know that a friend of mine who has a relatively successful, I would say, YouTube channel, pretty successful, doing well, and their content is, I would say, a little bit combative. It's not, whatever. A lot of it's talking about things like conspiracy theories and debunking stuff and all that kind of stuff. So you get some crazies on those comments, right? Some absolute crazies. And some also incredibly homophobic, transphobic, all that kind of stuff, particularly if they talk anything about the Christian right, which they do talk about. And I love their way of responding to this, which is to essentially reply to them with like, you're a poopy head, and stuff like that. Like, incredibly childish, incredibly silly, ridiculous replies. Not trying to argue with them because they're not going to, right? But often just being like, nah, and it kind of is just funny because it instantly takes the power out of that person's argument, because how do you argue against someone who's just calling you a poopy head? And it just means that they're not winding up the situation particularly. And if it does get wound up, they tend to step away and remove the comments and all that kind of stuff. But it also means that they can kind of show, we're not dealing with this on this channel, which I think is quite a fun way of doing it. There are ways of doing it without just straight up deleting the comments. Obviously, if it's incredibly offensive, the comments will be deleted. Obviously.
Luckily, I haven't had to deal with that.
Yeah. But I do think it's a very funny way of dealing with people who are just saying dumb shit. That and you're like, you know what? No, I've done a whole video debunking what you're saying, so I'm not going to argue with you. You came here to just yell at my video, so I'm going to just call you a poopy head and move on, or whatever, or something. It's very funny. I do appreciate that kind of behaviour. But it does mean that the fan base also then doesn't go in and start arguing with these people, and doesn't go in and start throwing horrible, getting into that toxic spiral, because they'll also just be like, poopy head, because that's what the YouTuber is doing and leading by example.
I think in these kinds of communities, and obviously each fan base is kind of different, but in these kinds of the growth of these smaller individualized fan bases that the internet has provided us with, which is fascinating to study, by the way, but they are very personality led, where, say, for example, J.K. Rowling is not that. Or else I think it would be very different. But the fact is that the vast majority of her fans were not people that she probably would have agreed with. No. And that's not something that I
including myself in that.
Yeah, exactly. But I bet that's not something that she expected either. And so when you then go, oh yeah, because you're a fan of my work, so you'll agree with me, and everyone went, whoa!
No.
Hold on!
Absolutely not.
Which is, it's really fascinating to kind of compare the two, that you can look at, say, a fan base of Rooster Teeth or a streamer and go, that's probably in some way some kind of reflection of the person. Or at least what the person is not willing to do, or is willing to do. With bigger, kind of like you said, the big media kinds of ones, that's not really the case, and that's kind of a completely different approach to things, which can be really fascinating in a different way.
I think if we do, let's talk about J.K. Rowling.
Okay.
I think if we do talk about things like Harry Potter, I think to start with, in that situation, there is a huge amount of struggle to remove something that a lot of people are very, very nostalgic about, and it is their major fandom, right? And at this point, in 2024, people who are still clinging on to Harry Potter, I kind of want to know why. I'm fascinated by that, just in general. Why are you still clinging on to this thing? But when it all originally kicked off, back in the day, when it, pre-lockdown, pre the crazy essay, all of that, I think there was still, and I would count myself amongst these people, as still very much a feeling of, I'm not really sure what's going on here. It's only a couple of liking tweets and all this sort of stuff. Give her the benefit of the doubt. And you kind of have this thing of like, I don't want to jump on a you're a terrible person bandwagon, because I'm not sure that's helpful. And then quite quickly it turned into, oh no, actually, that's bad. I remember I'd been employed, like I was actually being paid to be doing some cosplay work, promoting cosplay as a general hobby at a Harry Potter convention. And all of this was going on at the same time. And I'm like, I am being paid money to be here. I don't know how I feel about this. And so I went wearing Discworld costumes instead. To promote cosplay, because I was like, well, okay. And so I went wearing Discworld costumes, and then when I was doing my panels and stuff, I'd just be like, transphobia is bad, let's just start out with that. And then basically that was the last time I attended, because I was like, no, I can't do this anymore. I said my piece, I did it, and then I was like, yeah, we're not. And as somebody who was a fan of the series, like I've cosplayed as Harry, I've been to LeakyCon, stuff like that. LeakyCon, which is no longer a Harry Potter convention, interestingly, it's just a general fantasy literature convention now. So they completely rebranded there. I'm friends with, because of doing the work at that particular convention, I'm friends with some of the actors from the franchise and all this sort of stuff. And so talking to them and working out how on earth they reconcile these things is super interesting. Particularly when you are paid to be in that environment, right? I think there is a very different thing of you are a paid person who is involved in this environment versus how do you choose to interact with that as a fan? Again, creators versus whatever level of creator versus fan. And disengaging yourself as a fan is really hard because you are proud of things. I was very proud of my costumes that I've made for that. I made the Sword of Gryffindor and stuff like that. I was so proud of it.
Well, I have a friend who had tattoos.
Yeah, exactly.
So can't, what are you supposed to, that's not an element that you can just, I was able to just throw out my Ryan shirt. He can't just throw out his arm.
Well, exactly. This is it. I've had a friend who, I don't have Harry Potter tattoos, sorry, that was, I realised that sounded weird. A friend of mine who has Harry Potter tattoos has had them all covered up. Had them turned into something else. It's really, really hard.
Yeah, we ended up having a lengthy conversation, me and this friend. It's Alid Thomas, who I used to do a podcast with called Religion and Popular Culture Pod. The episodes, I think, are still available. but he's got Harry Potter tattoos. And we had long conversations about it because he was very torn of what to do, whether to get them covered, whether to keep them, you know, do I keep all the other stuff that I have? And I think what they ended up deciding, him and his partner decided, was that they were keeping all the stuff that they already had. Because it was already bought, the money was already given, there's no going back on that. Yeah. But they won't be buying anything new going forward, and they decided to keep the tattoos because they were already there, and no money went to J.K. Rowling for those tattoos. It was something that they picked, that a tattoo artist got paid for. And even though it's representative of the community, or of the franchise, they're seeing it more of the franchise through their eyes rather than through J.K. Rowling's eyes.
And I think that's a very difficult thing.
It is, because... and I think that no matter what answer he came up with would have been a good answer. Like, if he got them covered, I would have totally understood that, and his reasoning for keeping them, I totally understand. There's really not a good, proper, right answer. I mean, there's a couple of wrong ones, like it's
agreeing with J.K. Rowling.
Yeah, but other than that, like, there's not, you know, there's a lot of different ways that you can go, and I can see each different way and understand them.
I think as somebody who is part of the trans community, if I saw somebody with a Harry Potter tattoo today, I might have a moment of like, how much have you thought about that? Only because I think it is now incredibly prevalent, and part of the conversation of what she's doing is incredibly public, and is in, you know, it's gone outside of the internet sphere. It's gone outside of the Harry Potter fandom. It is now everywhere, and I find it interesting that people may not have come across that, because there are people who haven't. There are people who just don't understand what's going on, because they're not me, or they're not part of the trans community, they're not part of the LGBT community, they're not necessarily engaged with what it means. But could it also be that they're like, actually, I agree with her? There is a percentage that could be the case. And I do think that right now that is something that particularly trans people, if they see somebody over the age of, say, 25, I guess, maybe a bit younger than that, but not a child, essentially, not a child or a teenager, engaging with Harry Potter, that you go, ooh, are you making a statement? And that's really interesting, because there are people who are using it to make a statement, who are like, I don't give a fuck about trans people, I like Harry Potter more than trans. There are those people out there.
I wish tattoos kind of carried with them some kind of date of when you got them, so that way you could be like, oh, that was from like 20 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I'm not saying that your friend should get them covered up, because I don't think. But it is interesting that.
But I
like
think
a couple
he
of
would
years ago,
understand that, but you know, he's also the kind of person that within 2 sentences of speaking to him, you'd be like, oh, okay.
Yeah, exactly. And this is true. I feel the same about, like, I now. It's interesting. I have seen my perception of this shift within the last couple of years, because I would have very much been in that position of like, just stop buying things, stop engaging with it, you know, all that kind of stuff. You don't need new stuff. You don't need to go and see the new films, all that kind of thing. You don't need the new video games. Just have what you have. Until very recently, when now I'm like, I think maybe even that is, you know, what she's... I also don't think throw everything away. It's just trying to work out. It's so difficult, right?
It is. And I think, like I said, there's not a right or wrong answer. And I think there's a certain amount of, maybe I'm slightly understanding, because I come across, I mean, I am cis. I was going to say I come across as cis, but I am.
You are cis, yeah.
I was going to say I come across as cis and straight. I'm not straight, but I come across as straight. I am cis, I am white, and that means that there are people who, when they first approach me, are going to be approaching me with a certain level of Black people are going to be approaching me with a little bit of, I don't know if you're racist, until we have a conversation. There's going to be trans people not knowing if I'm transphobic, and that's just a part of what I know is part of existing. Yeah. And I get it. And I would never hold that against people. And so maybe that's why, to me, it would be like, well, yeah, any trans woman would probably be approaching Alan with a little bit of an even if he didn't have Harry Potter tattoos, because he's a straight white man, and you would be approaching with a little bit of
That's very true. Which is why I find it interesting when people still choose to cosplay and stuff from this franchise, because I'm like, that is a choice. That's not, I've got a tattoo and I'm not, from years ago and I haven't had it covered up.
There's nothing he can do.
No, absolutely. And it costs a lot of money to cover up a tattoo and all that kind of thing. It also costs a lot of money to make or buy a new costume. Yeah. So why, that is an odd choice as far as I'm concerned. That, to me, if I kind of see someone doing that at a convention now, I would be like, why? Why have you made that decision? It would ring alarm bells, which I find quite interesting. And it's not to say that those people are bad transphobic people at all. Again, they may just be not particularly engaged. I'm not going to judge every single person, but like you said, it does make me anxious to approach them. It might maybe be like, okay, which is, it's just an interesting thing. And I think that's why it's so difficult when it comes to being a fan of somebody who is being J.K. Rowling or doing something like that, where you kind of go, what level can I give this up? I mean, actually, I will use Lovecraft as an example of this, right? I would not say that I am particularly a fan of H.P. Lovecraft at all. I enjoy the work that he inspired and has been created from his ideas and then has spiraled off of it. I have seen people with Lovecraft tattoos, with, like I said, that guy with a Lovecraft t-shirt, people who are openly like, I love H.P. Lovecraft. And I'm like, right. Do we need to have a conversation about that? Because, to be honest, if I was a person of colour and I was a nerd, I am a nerd, but you know what I mean? If I was a person of colour who was a nerd and I saw somebody wearing a Lovecraft t-shirt, I might run in the other direction because I don't know what that means. Or at least I would be slightly sceptical of them. You'd be like, what part of that are you into, How
much people nowadays know about that? Because I think, didn't we get a question on, we did, some That's questions true. On Instagram, and somebody was like, what's the problem with Lovecraft? And it's like, ooh, how long you got?
That's maybe true.
So, and especially with it being so old, with J.K. Rowling, it's still in the news. Yeah. She's still coming up. She's still saying shit. So, but with Lovecraft, he's fucking dead.
That's true. And there is no estate, as we've discussed.
Yeah, so
nobody's getting any money from that.
I can kind of see why maybe you wouldn't know that extent. You've just seen the effects of his work. And like you say, the work is something that people can really gravitate towards and love and connect to. And
I think there are so many people who would gravitate towards that work that he would hate, which I find fascinating.
Yes.
I'm like, should we have a conversation?
I would say a large portion of the population he would hate. It doesn't matter whether they like his work.
But yes, no, to not know what's going on with J.K. Rowling, I kind of want to know if you're living under a rock or something. Are you?
But yeah, because I was writing in a cafe and somebody was like, oh, are you writing? Came up. I live in Salisbury and there's a lot of old people and they feel like they can come up and talk to me while I'm working. And they came up and were like, oh, are you writing a book? And I was like, normally I'm not, but today I am. And so I'm mad that I have to say yes. And so, oh yeah, I am. And he goes, oh, so you're going to be the next J.K. Rowling. And it took me a beat because I visibly was like, nope. But and I almost said maybe with less transphobia, but I just decided there's this old guy. He probably is just like, oh yeah, that's a big name for that young people and not knowing that.
I have to tell the story.
The reaction I would have had to that.
Yeah, I have to tell the story because if we're talking about crazy fan base nonsense, we need to talk about Chapel Roan. And I was sat in a cafe the other day writing, and I have, on various occasions, been on Telly Box, which means people in my town know who I am, which is weird. And the cafe owner, who is very nice, came up to me and said, oh, are you doing something else to get on to be famous? Kind of just a tongue-in-cheek kind of comment. He's very nice. And I made a comment back to be like, oh no, I think I need a break from that. I don't want to be followed around like a crazy person. And he obviously went, oh, you don't want me talking about that. I was like, no, I meant Chapel Roan, who's having this terrible time with fans and you're too old to know what I'm talking about. Oh shit. And I felt so bad for making him feel bad for talking to me because he's really nice. And I was like, no, I meant this. Oh, shit. I'm going to have to explain that next time I go in, or maybe I'll just never go in again. Now he just thinks I'm mean. And I want to be like, no, when I came in last time, that wasn't what I meant. I meant this, and I realised that, there was no context for you, and I'm so sorry. Or I'll just never go to that cafe again. It's one of my favourite cafes to writing in, and I feel awful. Like, I'm like, no. Oh, God, Ollie, people don't know about the crazy internet drama about a pop star they've never heard of. Like, the curse of knowledge here is too big.
But, I mean, I think Chapel Roan's a good example of the opposite of what I was saying about the streamers, of, like, that's not... People who are fans of her are not a reflection necessarily of her, which is really weird, because, like, especially with the Good Luck Babe, right? Which is a lesbian love song, right?
Yep.
And it so encapsulates a very common experience in the LGBT community. And the number of straight women who are thinking this song is like just a normal love song and not like a breakup closeted lesbian song is just
like, there is so much about that, about having like that thing of being the secret girlfriend, or and being on both sides of that coin as well. Like, I know that there are moments when I was still working out if I was coming out and all this kind of stuff, where I definitely was not very good at dealing with relationships and all this sort of stuff as a teenager. And it's really hard being on both sides of that coin, whether you're ready to come out or not. And that song is so it resonates so hard with so many people about that particular thing, whatever strand of queer you are. I do find it really interesting, like I said, that straight people also, I mean, that means it's a good song. It means it's well written.
but I like, saw that there was somebody posted
that
they got like an shower, like bachelorette party, I think, thing for their straight friend, and it was playing Good Luck Babe. Yeah. For like a wedding for straight people. And I'm like, first of all, it is not a we love each other song.
No.
It's a breakup song.
Yeah.
It's a breakup song not for people like you.
I don't think, even as me, a queer person, I don't think I'd ever put that song on a wedding playlist.
Oh my, I'm sorry. I don't know if my microphone's picking up on it, but they have decided to do a load of yard work right outside my flat. So I'm really
I can
hoping
hear
that
it,
doesn't get picked up.
But yeah, no, that's... if we're going to talk about her fan base, though, like, what's going on with... She is trying very hard to tell her fans to stop being crazy. Mm. And she is doing that work of being like, no. And she's also doing that work with the paparazzi and being like, You know, she has skyrocketed to fame overnight. Like, you know, she has gone from being a jobbing musician, doing hard work, all that kind of stuff with a small fan base, to then huge amounts of fame. And people are treating her badly because she's telling them not to be insane. And now her mental health has been so badly affected by what's happening that she's cancelling shows, and then people are getting more mad at her for that. And it's like, guys, you did this. Like, this is your fault. Like, if you'd have just been like, I really like her music, she's really cool, and not stalked her or doxed her or gone after her family where she still lives or any of this other shit that you've been doing, she'd still be playing those shows. All that, like, people got mad when she cancelled a show to go and do rehearsals for the VMAs and then perform at the VMAs. And it's like, she didn't cancel the show straight off. She just moved the date. She just was like, I'm still going to do this show. Here's another date. You're getting your tickets transferred over. Fine. You know? And yes, that might annoy some people, but it's also like, don't be mad at her for doing her job.
Yeah.
You know? Like, I can totally understand that if you are somebody who's been supporting her for a long time, you were part of that small fan base. You may now feel like she's got famous and she's doing the VMAs instead of coming to this show that you've been really excited about for ages. I can absolutely understand that. But the behaviour of some of these people is like they have ownership over her and she owes them something. And it's like, no. And to get mad at somebody who has been going through publicly an awful lot of shit because they've got famous in like literal skyrocketing. Like, if you look at the numbers, it's insane, which doesn't happen very often without, you know, she doesn't have a team with her. She does now, but at the time she that's a very new thing. To tell somebody, oh, sorry, you can't cancel your shows because your mental health is bad, how dare you, because of the shit that the people on the internet have done to you. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. Like, I really hope that her standing up for herself and you know, all this kind of stuff is it starts changing the direction of how fans treat people, because it just feels like how, I mean, we could talk about Britney Spears in this situation, people like that, and Amy Winehouse, you know, all of these young female artists who get this shit thrown at them continuously.
Britney Spears is really fascinating because of the weird flow of it, right? Because I mean, the way that the fans were treating her kind of helped to get her into the conservatorship in the first place, which sucks. But then it was the fans that kind of rallied together to get her out of it.
Yeah, and then they treated her badly again afterwards.
You know.
Crazy.
But I mean, I remember going through a deep dive of Free Britney before the documentary thing came out. And because I was just scrolling around finding weird fandom stuff, and I found Free Britney, and I was like, oh, this is weird. And so I started looking into it, and I was like, this seems like weirder than just some people with a weird conspiracy theory. Like, I think it was right after her son came out to try to be like, no, really, guys. And I was at an academic conference at the time. I was looking it up because I couldn't sleep. And so the next morning I was chatting to some of my friends, and I was like, oh my god, there's this weird thing I found out about with Free Britney. And they all were rolling their eyes, being like, oh, people are weird. And that's so stupid. And I was like, no, I mean, like, there's like actually some evidence here, which I think is really fascinating. And they're like, oh, whatever. And then like a year or two later, the Free Britney documentary came out. And I was like, no.
It's so... yeah, because the thing is, like, so much of that comes down to how fans treat people. You know, because I don't...
But it's
but also then...
I think it's also a different group, right?
Yeah.
So, like, the group of people who were doing the Free Britney were people who were fans of Britney during that hiatus, before she got famous again for being in this situation, which happened with the documentary. And then suddenly people started being like, oh, Britney, I remember Britney. But it's like, but you had a hiatus of fandom, but the people who were still there were a different group of people.
Yeah.
And those were the group of people that I saw on comments going, no, that's fine. You take your time. Yeah. You take your break. You deserve it. Yeah. But and they were so quiet in comparison.
Yeah. And I think it's very similar with the Chappell Roan situation. The people who are treating her badly, the people who are making all these comments, are likely the ones who've discovered her in the last year. You know? Or even 6 months. Whereas I think her original fan base, and while some of them are obviously upset about things like concerts and stuff being cancelled, do seem to be much more understanding of her going, oh my god, what is happening? And I'm not so... That's a very big generalisation. I'm not going to say that's, you know, entirely true across the board, but it does seem to be the difference in that same way. And it's interesting that actually, is it the core fandom who are behaving badly in this situation, or is it a more general fan situation that's causing that to happen? And it's not to say that new fans are all toxic, because obviously that's not the case either. But that thing of lots of people who are kind of making this thing of like, well, you wanted fame, this is what you get. And it's like, no. No. Absolutely
well, and also
not.
You would normally have that kind of slow growth of being able to have, I mean, as we said, I mean, I don't think people like Chappell Roan or Britney Spears or J.K. Rowling have as much control over their fan base as, say, a streamer does.
Yeah.
But they have some level of discussion and influence, and when it's a slow growth, you have the ability to still control that. And I think Taylor Swift is a good example of this. While there are some weird, toxic Swifties.
Oh, there are some insane Swifties.
Yeah, but they're not... that's not how you would define Swifties.
It's interesting because I was listening to Matt Bernstein's podcast about this, and he got doxxed because he dared to not say the nicest things about Taylor Swift. And I'm like, what is wrong with people? He's allowed to criticize Taylor Swift. It wasn't even that bad. So yeah, there are some mental Swifties out there, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh no, we're gonna get doxxed now. Shit.
Well, no, I mean, I've been on record on 2 different bonus episodes on how much I love Taylor Swift.
It's just gonna be me.
It's just you.
She's fine.
I did a whole history of Taylor. Thank you very much.
But it is interesting how these fans interact. It does feel... I do actually recommend listening to that episode of A Bit Fruity with Matt Bernstein, because it is very good, where he talks about... He does a deep dive into Chaperone. Very interesting. Anyway, but it is interesting how fans choose to interact with people, and choose to interact with people over item. Thing, story, whatever this is, because there is I would say those are two different types of fandom. Like, I've written extensively about fandom. I very rarely write about fandoms of celebrities, because I think it's kind of different.
It is different, yeah.
And the way people treat celebrity is a much more parasocial thing, even when it gets to that outer ring of fans. So you think about, like, the way that people treat, I think the Meghan Markle situation is kind of like this, that, like, even people who are not even fans of the royals, not even they have a parasocial relationship with whatever's going on because of the papers. And I think celebrity falls more into that kind of category of fandom, whereas there are a lot of people who don't know what Rooster Teeth is and will have no idea about all this drama and all this kind of stuff, and that fan base, that it kind of doesn't escape its sphere. Whereas I think celebrity fandom often does. It kind of goes, it spreads. It doesn't even have a sphere so much. You'll have those core fans, but everybody kind of knows what's going on, because they are it's almost a public body even, and that sounds awful, but that's kind of what's happened. It feels like there's a public ownership of this person, which is bad. Shouldn't be the case, but that's almost how celebrity fandoms work, which is what's happened with Britney Spears, Chaperone, all these kind of often women. Just going to put that out there.
I was about to say, Taylor also has an issue of fans with ownership over her.
Yeah. Whereas I think when it comes to... We'll keep using Harry Potter because it's quite a good example. When it comes to that, you can disavow J.K. Rowling to a greater or lesser extent completely, and still be like, but I am a fan of Harry Potter. And people go, oh yeah, no, okay. But there also are people, like I said, who may not even know what's going on over there. Even with the most famous book series in the world, they don't know what's going on.
I think it's odd, because I think I would describe myself as someone who's a fan of Taylor Swift's music, but not Taylor Swift, which is... That's not normally how you would separate that. But it is kind of similar in the sense that, like, because I don't know her as a person. Her personality comes across in her music, but to this, as much of an extent as an author's personality comes across in their books. Like, it is a curated, thoughtful, poetic version of herself. Yeah. That is often the extreme emotional element that might not necessarily be how you're feeling every single day. I don't know how she is on a Tuesday. Yeah. I'm not there.
It's quite interesting, because some people, even when it comes to book fandoms, more like... I think if there is a single entity at the top of the pile, say an author, songwriter, celebrity or whatever, you do end up having a parasocial relationship with them.
Yeah.
It's quite difficult to do that with Lego, for example. If you're just a big fan of Lego, you really like Lego, there's nothing really to be parasocial about, unless you find a streamer or something who does lots of Lego. I think that's more of a
contemporary thing, because I don't know if that was necessarily how things worked, say, with Jane Austen. Because Jane Austen was big in her time. But, I mean... People
used to go into the gardens of authors and stuff.
Saying it's to a different extent now, because they couldn't go on... Someone not in England couldn't know what Jane Austen was up to.
Yeah, fair enough.
Which now they would... They can't now, she's dead. But, like, if she was alive now... then they would be able to do that. And someone in South Africa would be able to feel like they know what Jane Austen's doing on a Tuesday. Which
it's on a different level.
It's a very different level. And I think Brandon... Now, I have only just recently started reading Brandon Sanderson. I've only read one book. But I know Brandon Sanderson. And that's a demonstration of not only his own ability to curate his image, particularly online... but also how people feel about Brandon Sanderson as a author celebrity figure. I mean, I could pick him out of a lineup, and I can never do that with authors.
I mean, I think the Pratchett alarm should go off now, because Terry Pratchett is very similar to that. People, I mean, obviously he is dead now, unfortunately, but people knew Terry, right? Terry curated his fandom, right? He worked hard to... he was at the conventions and stuff like that. He was there being part of it, knowing these people. And, you know, there are people who are fans of his that ended up in his work because he knew them so well, or because, you know, they were an interesting person to him, or various other reasons, right? And so I think it's very interesting when you see that, where it's like, Terry Pratchett is one of the most famous writers in the world, New York Times bestseller and all this stuff, but was still able to hold an image of himself and control it, and to be there amongst the fans in that way, and such that he could kind of be like, yeah, I'm gonna keep hold of this. It's a really interesting thing. And that's not to say that, again, that it would have been a core group, but his influence would have spread out of that. Like, I could tell you exactly what Terry Pratchett looks like. I think most people could tell you what Terry Pratchett looked like. Most literary humans, I'm not going to say like random man on the street could. They might not even know who Terry Pratchett was. I once met somebody who didn't know who Arthur Conan Doyle was, and that really confused me.
That is just a dumbass.
Yeah, I was just like, we were doing that game where you have to write like a famous person on your head and then they have to guess who it was. And like literally like 3 people around the table went, I don't know who that is. And I was like, what? How do you not?
Is that when you got up from the table and never spoke to them again?
It was when I very seriously considered quitting my job, which I then did do 4 months later, because I was just like, how can I be here?
Just slowly back up.
Just like, who are you people? We are not the same people.
Well, I think we've been a little all over the place today, but...
Oh, yeah, I know. Sorry. This feels like a chat, just us having a chat about fandom.
It was a bit, but I think it was something that we haven't touched too much. We've touched a little bit, particularly when it came to J.K. Rowling, but we haven't, I think, dwelled on it as its own phenomenon.
Maybe we need to come back to it.
I think so. Point. I think maybe with a little bit more of a specificity to it at some point.
But I do find it very interesting. I like these chats we have because I feel like we end up thinking about it in ways we hadn't thought about before. And it's... Fandom is an ever-faceted thing, I think.
Yeah, and always developing and changing, which is what makes it so fun.
By the time we come back for next series, it'll be completely different.
Oh, yeah. So we have to keep going forever.
Oh, what a shame.
Oh,
what a
we
terrible
should
thing to be doing.
This is the last episode of season 2. If you do not support us on Patreon,
there will be more.
If you do support us on Patreon, we're gonna keep going.
Yeah.
We're basically gonna be releasing episodes in the same order, the same amount of time. So every fortnight you would get a new episode on Monday, same release date, everything like that. You'll get your own RSS feed, so it stays on whatever you're listening to. You can just keep going until the new season 3 starts.
Can't promise they'll be as well constructed as this one was. They also might be a bit shorter. Sorry, guys. But...
So, yeah, I mean, we might also do really long ones at some point. We don't know.
Who wants a whole documentary series?
It could be.
Oh, dear. But yes, please do support us on Patreon. If you like what we're doing, you can do it for £1 a month. If you want lots of extra goodies, because it's not just this, there's a Discord server as well. We'll be doing, if you subscribe to the higher tier, there are choose your own episode kind of things.
Yeah, we're going to be, as we start to plan out season 3, which will be happening probably pretty soon, we're going to start figuring it out. We're probably going to start putting up some polls up over on Patreon for I think it's £5 is the higher tier, for you guys to vote on what topics we cover in season 3.
But if you the £1 tier is, you get access to the Discord and you do get the bonus episodes. No, only on the £5 tier.
Only
I
on the
apologise.
£5.
You just
get access to Discord, so you can have connect to the other fans of fans,
and also irritate us because we're hanging around. So yes, please do, if you love what we're doing and you're enjoying listening to this nonsense, please do consider supporting the Patreon. It really does help us a huge amount. I feel like we should do a shout out to the people who have supported the Patreon. And a shout out to those people who have already supported our Patreon, which is Tony, Sam, and David. Thank you, all 3 of you. Yay! Thank you so much. If you want to be added to the list, please consider going and supporting us on Patreon. That's Fan of That Pod. If you search for patreon.com/Fan of That Pod, you'll find it, or just search for Fan of That Pod on Patreon and you'll get to us. It's also in our link tree, which is on all our social media, so apart from TikTok, because TikTok won't let you do that till you have 1,000 followers. So go follow us on TikTok too, so we can have a link. That would be great. But yes, on our Instagram, in the thing, the episode description, all that kind of stuff, you can find our Patreon.
Yep.
Yay!
Yeah, so those lovely patrons, we will see you in 2 weeks with a lovely bonus episode, and the rest of you will be back on season 3.
Which will be May?
Yeah, I think that's normally when we drop it, April or May.
We'll see you in the spring. Enjoy your winter. Of course there'll be a Christmas episode.
Oh yes, Christmas episode, which we haven't recorded yet, so we'll figure that
out. This was a mess. Right, bye guys. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. Remember to like, review and subscribe wherever you listen to this podcast, and do give it a share. Tell your friends, family and fellow fans and get the word out. You can follow us on social media, links in the show notes, as are some links to further reading. Who doesn't like a reading list? We are nerds after all. Music for this episode was Nowhere Land by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons Attribute 3.0. This episode was produced by Vivian, Asimos and Holly Swinyard.